The current financial system was built for the elite. It was built to ensure that those that control institutions and have a vast amount of money can make even more profit at the expense of regular citizens that are from the working class. The current financial system was designed to promote the wealth of a minority, which is why that minority tries everything possible to discourage people from using Bitcoin, because they know they will end up losing that privilege they have been carrying for centuries.
We live in a system where we are forced to use a certain currency. In our case, let's say the US dollar. We didn't choose to use the US dollar. We didn't have a vote about whether we were going to use the US dollar. We're forced to use the US dollar. And that US dollar is controlled by political organizations that make political decisions to benefit themselves at the cost of others.
Decades of policies that were probably well-intentioned have led to the worst levels of income inequality and wealth concentration we've seen since the 1920s. And at this point, we have politicians who just throw blame and they come in and say, I'll fix it. But unfortunately, they can't fix it because in order to keep the system going, they have to keep printing money. And the more they keep printing money, the more the wealth concentration grows and the more unfair and unequal the system becomes.
And that's why we're seeing today in the post-lockdown world, all the central banks around the world printed tons and tons of money. And that just doesn't make any sense. And so people say, well, why are housing prices going crazy? And why are food prices going crazy? Well, it's inflation. It's actually not really inflation. Inflation is when there's excess demand for limited supply, so the price rises. This is currency devaluation.
We can only trust systems that cannot be discriminatory. And Bitcoin is powerful in a way that is money that does not discriminate based on race, based on gender, ethnicity, or even geographic location. A person holding Bitcoin in Togo today will have the same value as a person holding the same quantity of Bitcoin in the United States.
I'm not techie. I'm really horrible with technology. But once I understood what blockchain was, blockchain's integrity. Bitcoin is based upon integrity. That's why I call it people's money. The government cannot make it. Bitcoin is not this centralized control of the economy. Bitcoin is built by the people, for the people.
If you consider how many steps it takes for a merchant to sell a good to a consumer in the traditional world today, it takes 9 steps. And what the Bitcoin network does is take 7 of those steps away. It's peer-to-peer. Those steps, by the way, are dominated by toll takers. They're taking fees. And so up to 3%, sometimes more, of the transaction, which actually can be saved by both the merchant and the consumer.
One of my favorite aspects of Bitcoin is the limited supply of 21 million. I think that having something that can't be changed makes it so powerful, and it makes people appreciate, just like their time is limited, their own personal wealth is limited. When they see that the Bitcoin amount is limited to 21 million, it really makes them understand the difference between Bitcoin and every other currency, all fiat currencies which don't have this limit. So that key is what makes Bitcoin special.
You know, if you are one of the 50% of the planet who does not have a bank account, you are shut off from the global economy. You can't go shopping on the internet if you don't have access to a credit card or some form of digital payment. So there's a huge amount of people around the world that are frozen out of the financial system and the ability to improve their life circumstances. Bitcoin, it is designed ultimately to replace both the monetary system and the financial system. It is a math-based system where at its core, it is trying to remove politics from money. The beautiful part about that is that anyone, anywhere in the world can use Bitcoin at any time for any reason. No one can censor them, no one can stop them, no one can tell them that their use of money is wrong or not allowed. No one is going to change the rules on them halfway through, and everyone operates by the same rules. It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire, it doesn't matter if you're a president, it doesn't matter who you are. You have the exact same rights within the Bitcoin system that the person who makes $1 a day has.
Do I believe that it can help people rise up out of poverty and give them opportunity to do business where they weren't able to before? Yes, I do. And it's certainly been the case around the world where people have gotten access to a financial system that they didn't have access to before.
For example, talk about financial inclusion, for instance. The current financial system excludes a large amount of people from being able to access financial services.
If you looked at a continent like Africa, one of the reasons they can't crawl out of poverty is because the currencies in every country in Africa they're either broken completely defective, or they're impaired, and they're continually siphoning economic energy from the working class and from the businesses in those economies into the hands of the politicians that control the corrupt currencies. You, in essence, don't really have any hope of accumulating wealth if you're paid in a defective currency and the currency is continually collapsing.
Not only does Bitcoin allow people to be their own bank, it is the only form of money that gives us digital property rights.
Bitcoin is very transformative because it gives us a new set of building blocks. We don't know all the things that we can build with those building blocks, but what we do know is that it's solved maybe the oldest problem in humanity, which is how do I secure my property in a way that can't be stolen?
The ability of a person to have full rights to the money that he has earned, that he has brought into being, without interference of any more powerful entity, whether it is a band or a gang or a government or anything else that could use force against him. That's a huge advantage and a huge asset.
Coming from the former Soviet Union, my parents brought my family over 1989. I was 7 years old. Along with my sister, and we left the Soviet Union because many people know it was a very oppressive regime. Things were scarce, goods were scarce, people weren't really free to do what they wanted, information was very strictly controlled. So what I found out is that when we left, the government was able to exchange about $100 per person. For my family of four, that meant we left with $400 in our pockets. And that's all we could take with us. Otherwise, our option was to exchange these Soviet rubles on the street, which basically had no value. Had we had Bitcoin back in the Soviet Union in 1989, we could have actually taken our hard work and everything that we had done with us, that value that we earned.
If you show up at the airport with all of your money in any other nation state, they either arrest you, they send you home, or more likely, they take your money and send you home. Right? Try to walk through an airport in most countries with $1 million of gold in your backpack and see how far you get. You can't even walk through with more than 10,000 of anything. Governments have captured the capital of their citizens, and if they can force you to use the currency while they've got the capital captured, they can simply seize as much of your capital as they wish by debasing the currency more aggressively. Bitcoin reverses that balance of power because now for the first time, you could actually store your capital in a hardware wallet or in a set of private keys. And you don't have to move it physically through the airport or on a ship. You can actually move it through cyberspace with 12 words. You can send all the digital capital in the country over a WhatsApp message. There's a famous phrase, an armed society is a polite society. When the citizens are disarmed and the government's the only entity with the guns, then one person can simply steal all the property. And when 95% of the citizens are starving to death, that's not a problem. As long as 1% of the people have the guns and you feed the 1% with the guns, you can still control the country. And that's what happened in many nations, in North Korea, in Cuba, in Zimbabwe, etc. Bitcoin economically arms everybody. Like for the first time in history, you can fight back. You actually can store your economic energy and protect it with cryptography and a 300 exahash wall of encrypted energy, and no mayor or governor or country can seize that from you, no matter how much weaponry they have. And what happens then? If I can't take it from you by a force, I have to negotiate with you.
So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a piece of software that allows two parties to exchange value over the internet in a transparent and trustless fashion, as easy as sending an email.
So we're free to send Bitcoin through the internet as money without permission from any government or bank. But you might be wondering what the difference is between Bitcoin and the CBDCs you've been hearing about.
What a CBDC is central bank digital currency. Now, what it is they're trying to take, and when I say they, I mean central banks and the government, are trying to take the concept of fiat currency and digitize it into a digital dollar. Now, the challenge with this is that allowing the state to create these central bank digital currencies, it is creating a mechanism by which the government can surveil every single transaction that an individual makes. And not only can they surveil these transactions, it allows them to turn off your bank account if you start doing something that they disagree with. This is an extremely slippery slope that if we allow the government to go down this path, it has the potential to enslave humanity in the long term. And I think it's something that we need to carefully review, because if we go down a CBDC path, allowing the government this level of control, it's unprecedented, which is why we should avoid this at all costs and stick to a hard money standard like Bitcoin.
The central bank literally would be in position to cancel any transaction. It would be permissioned, not permissionless. And it's one thing, for MasterCard, for example, to know how much they paid to Walmart last year, but it's another thing for them to tell the world how much you paid at Walmart last year. And it's a whole different level of creepy for them to say exactly what did you buy at Walmart last year. And I think people kind of broadly get that sense of privacy. That's what's at stake here. I think the future of money really is one of the most important policy debates we're having today. And when you think about where people could go with a kind of an Orwellian surveillance state money system like a central bank digital currency, it really is a good versus evil. And Bitcoin in this case is on the good.
The countries that are clinging to a CBDC are trying to control their people. And those are weak governments. Weak leaders are the ones who try to control everybody. The strongest leaders are the ones who trust people and set them free.
The problem I have with CBDCs is they're Marxist. And what I mean, the central bank. Marxism is central banking system. So that's why I support Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, I saw the strength coming from the people, not the government.
I think the CBDCs, wherever they are a threat to freedom. Absolutely.
You're seeing CBDCs in China right now where the populace are trying to go into a store and they're scanning a QR code and they're seeing in their wallet that it's an invalid purchase because maybe they're from a region that's 100 miles away, or they're going to a pharmacy and they don't want that person to have access to that type of drug or medical treatment. With the CBDC comes the programmability and control of the government saying you're allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do that. And we've already seen it rolled out in China, and it looks a little scary. So when you're doing that compare and contrast between a CBDC and Bitcoin, it's all about who's controlling the actual ledger. One's actually decentralized, the other one is not. It's completely controlled by the government.
Let's get back to the idea that Bitcoin fixes everything and look at exactly what it can fix.
I think that there's a moral case being made for Bitcoin in that it is for the end consumer, for the citizen. It is the stable form that cannot be stolen or corrupted or manipulated or inflated. And so for an individual, that is a great thing. It doesn't necessarily benefit certain governments who want the ability to wipe out with the stroke of a pen or the muzzle of a gun the bank accounts of its citizens.
We decided to collect some donations in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was a kind of a plan B for us. The very concept of Bitcoin is tightly connected to the concept of financial freedom for everyone in the world, and give understanding that Bitcoin is a significant tool in a fight against global evil.
You know, when people go to protest, whether it's in Uzbekistan, in Russia, or Belarus, or Ukraine, or somewhere, it's important that you know that you have financial tool
which cannot be turned off in the moment when you need it, when you need to be able to fight for your freedoms. And shouldn't be naive thinking that someone in your country would not abuse the power. One day it could happen. You have to be prepared.
Where you see Bitcoin expanding really fast is actually nations that need it the most. Right? You see why El Salvador is a natural is because they're most punished. They're furthest away from the monopoly system of money today. And so nations that have always seen either hyperinflation or dictators, and what you're seeing is those populations race into this open monetary protocol, and nobody can stop them. It is freedom.
These are places where the government has failed in some sense. And so a lot of critics think, oh, well, Bitcoin is just something that, rich Westerners like, and it's a tool to gamble with. But really, the on-the-ground adoption is happening in places where people actually need it. And I think that's an extremely telling early data point.
And so, if you live in Nigeria, Nigeria has among the highest Bitcoin adoption rates in the world, more than 30% of people use it. It's actually a very useful tool to do peer-to-peer transactions.
Bitcoin, when you look at its alternative as a money where you don't have to trust anyone, and you can move it across countries, you can send it to your family. I've heard tons of stories from Argentinians on how they use Bitcoin to get around capital controls, to get around, government restricts the ability to move dollars in and out of the country, and Bitcoin is this fantastic alternative for that.
My country is ruled by the oldest military regime in Africa, same government in power for 57 years. And this is a brutal, rogue military regime that puts us under unimaginable amount of abuse and pain and control. Activists and dissidents arrested, killed, their bodies dumped in the sea. Countless of activists are jailed and have been in prison for years with no trial. Many others have disappeared, their families have never seen their body, and thousands others have fled the country, living in exile like myself. I see Bitcoin as a tool of political, social, and economic liberation. The reason why is because the ideology behind Bitcoin in itself is geared toward giving monetary agency back to people, to citizens, no longer having people depend on banks and governments to control their money and determine its worth. We are also in a situation where, as citizens of our nation, our money is worth absolutely nothing outside of our borders. So when I see Bitcoin, I see it as a tool that can allow us to put an end to this continuous colonial system that has maintained our countries and our people in bondage. The goal of my activism is to eventually get to a point where my people can live freely and in dignity. And that cannot be attained without financial freedom.
Digital Sun Fund, which is my non-profit organization. What we do is trying to empowering young women and children in developing countries like Afghanistan. But there was an issue about there was an inability to paying these women because many of these women didn't have a bank account, and we have to actually send the money to their male relatives' bank account. And many of these women sometimes says that they never received the money because once the money goes in the hands of the men and the relatives, they prefer to not give the money to the women. And why it's like that? Because in a conservative communities, some men are trying to control the lives of the women. And obviously, the first thing is that they don't want that the women have the financial freedom. So we heard about Bitcoin, and we thought, wow, we can use Bitcoin and send to the women directly, and they can have control of their own finance. That was interesting, and we deployed a Bitcoin wallet within our system. We created a user-friendly platform that was very easy for them to find where their wallet is, how much money they're making, and then what they can do with this money. Bitcoin has helped us bypass the physical and social barriers. If you have cell phones and smartphones and you have access to internet, you can have your bank with you everywhere. And that's why I think that the magic of the Bitcoin is.
The Jews of Eastern Europe when the Nazis arrived, the Jews of Spain before that, Jews of Arab countries in the late 40s and early 50s. Jews were thrown out of Syria in huge numbers, thrown out of Egypt in huge numbers, with nothing, literally with nothing. Gosh, if they could have taken their digital wallets with them, what a beautiful thing that would have been.
I think Bitcoin is as much an ideology as it is a technology, but because it's an ethical ideology, there are many people that feel very spiritual about it and others that view it as a religion. If you worship truth, if you worship integrity, if you worship conservation of energy and balance in the universe, then Bitcoin is your religion.